And I encourage everyone to read the IG report because it really explains the coup plotting and thinking of the coup plotters. Because it's more than just about whether James Comey took memos on what President Trump was telling him and keeping them at his home and then illegally leaking them. And among all those memos was classified information, which he shouldn't have had and which he shouldn't have shared, all of which he could have been prosecuted for. But I thought the biggest aspect of the IG report was the description of Comey's ambush interview or meeting with President Trump, or then President-elect Trump, in the beginning of 2017. They had had a meeting a few days before, I think, with the president and the vice president and other senior leadership, and they talked about the dossier.
Right.
The salacious and unverified dossier, and those terms are Comey's terms. And he said, well, we're going to have to brief President Trump on this, or then President-elect Trump. And the supposed reason for the briefing generally was to talk about Russian interference in the campaign. But it's evident the real reason was to confront him with this dossier because they were investigating him and they wanted to know what his reaction was. So Comey was playing spy against then President-elect Trump. And obviously the dossier was fraudulent. They knew it was salacious and unverified, and yet they threw it in his face with the hopes of getting a reaction they then could use against him. And the report details how Comey goes downstairs and there's a laptop, a secure laptop, waiting in his car, and he immediately begins typing away about this, this pre-planned assault on the president. And he goes to his office, I guess it was a field office of New York, and he immediately begins a secure video teleconference with his colleagues, including, it looks like, Lisa Page and Peter Strzok.
Right.
So this was this ambush interview of President-elect Trump, and it's pretty clear all of Comey's interactions with Trump, because he was memorializing him, were part of a spy operation against President Trump to try to get him and destroy him. That's what the IG report's about. So, however disappointing the prosecution, the failure to prosecute him for keeping those FBI files he had on Trump at his home and then leaking them it's as important to know that the FBI director, initially tasked by President Obama, certainly with his acquiescence, was spying on President-elect Trump and then President Trump. And then on top of it, he leaks this information as part of a vendetta after he's fired with the hopes of getting a special counsel appointed. And of course, he got his special counsel, his friend, Robert Mueller. So it highlights the criminality of just how base the criminality was of Mr. Comey. It highlights the corrupt formation of the independent, the special counsel, and it shows that the coup plotting was real.
Tom, I read some of what James Comey's response to the report was, and it's almost like we're talking about are we talking about the same report here? I mean, he was saying it exonerates him. This doesn't seem to match up very well with what
that's why it's good for Americans to be able to read this document for themselves. It doesn't exonerate him. And I don't know why he wasn't prosecuted, but he's lucky he wasn't prosecuted. He should have been prosecuted, but he certainly had FBI files he shouldn't have had. At one point, this is worth repeating. So he has the FBI over at his home. And he's talking about documents. And he said, well, I got these other documents here. You want them? And they're like, of course we want them. But he didn't tell them at the time that he leaked them. And of course, some of it was classified. So these same people are watching him the next day testify to Congress. And he says, well, I gave them to my friend, Mr. Richmond, who was the professor friend, his designated leaker.
Right.
And the IG report recounts that the FBI general counsel, upon seeing that, ran down the hall with Peter Strzok, literally ran down the hall with Peter Strzok to go and call Richmond because they knew he had classified information he shouldn't have had and they needed to retrieve it. If anyone else had pulled that with the FBI, played games with whether they had classified information and whether they shared it, and they found out about it, they would have been arrested and there would have been a raid on their home to figure out what other potential material they had. Read the IG report, read the IG's conclusions. He had documents he had no business hiding, and the dishonesty even in dealing with the IG is incredible. Because the IG says, why would you think these are personal documents? You were talking to the president about business, even at dinner. And he says, well, yeah, I was there as FBI director, but I was also there as a human being. So that's not a credible answer, and frankly it just shows me that Comey thought he could do no wrong, and it's a shame the Justice Department allows him to continue to think that by refusing to prosecute him.
So, you think so? Is that it for James Comey?
Yeah, I don't see any further prosecution of James Comey. It would be a pleasant surprise. I mean, to me, this is a straightforward issue. He confessed to leaking the FBI files. They were classified. He was engaging in this illicit spying on President Trump. I mean, that's Spygate in essence. So the idea that the IG report's going to come up and confirm what we already know, that the FISA warrants were fraudulently obtained, therefore illegally obtained, and new prosecutions will arise out of that, I'd be surprised. But pleasantly so. But that's why Judicial Watch just does our work, because even with Comey's IG report, it confirmed with new details what we already knew thanks to Judicial Watch disclosures through the FOIA. The same with the FISA-gate. We'll get more details, but there's been reporting, there's been documents we've obtained through FOIA that we'll talk about even with from the FBI itself recently, that show you there's more than enough to initiate prosecutions now. They don't have to wait for an IG. They're not going to launch a prosecution immediately upon an IG report anyway. They have to do their own investigation and question people before grand juries and with their lawyers. So I just don't see it happening.